water has healing properties. It can change your life. It's the closest thing that could kind of keep you connected to the heavens. That was one of the main reasons why African Americans chose to stay on the water.
History really is the foundation that we're all standing on right now. How do we make sure that we understand a collective past in order for us to embrace a collective future?
Today, we're facing a crisis of not knowing our history, our values, our heritage, not knowing the strong, independent people we came from.
The more a person can identify with their past, the more they can be proud in moving forward with their future.
Understanding the history and understanding what is available to us here in Baltimore, I think is important for everybody to know.
A lot of students have really looked at education as their ticket to get out and then pay it forward. I'm a living testimony.
By virtue of being a sailor, you're always a part of history. You're carrying on a tradition that is thousands of years old.
You are walking in the path of pioneering Black mariners.
When I first got the opportunity to sail, and that was the first sense of freedom I ever experienced, I knew what I wanted to do the rest of my life.
In the maritime and the marine industry, it's a great career. It really tests your ambition.
It's a chance to create a new type of destiny.
All we can do is change the future.
That right up in tight there. The dry docking of USS Constellation, it's something that doesn't happen very often. When it does, it's a big deal.
Just trying to bang everything down, make it as flat as possible. And what we're doing right now is a lot of work, but more so over remodeling. I take the roofing saw and I paint it, and we call it ice in the cake. We want to put a lot of icing on the cake. That's a lot of icing, man. That's like the cushion to keeping the water out.
The USS Constellation, launched in the 1850s. It's a part of our heritage, part of our maritime heritage, part of our nation's heritage.
Towards the end of the Civil War, it became a ship that captured slave ships.
That was a warship, and it freed Black slaves.
The Constellation was tasked on an anti-slave mission in Africa.
They were influential in returning Africans back to their home. In my opinion, that's the best part of the vessel's history.
Constellation is the largest example of Chesapeake Bay wooden shipbuilding in existence. You know, we take the job of preserving her and taking care of her very seriously, and I think that's, you know, evidenced by what we're doing here right now.
The way you keep a boat watertight is by caulking. Caulking is the method of driving something in between wooden planks to keep the water out.
We're using natural fibers, cotton, and then oakum, which is a hemp product. Wooden ship and boat builders have been driving some kind of natural fiber in between the planks of a wooden boat for centuries.
I have some professionals working and also some pre-release folks who are working with us as well.
Project Serve is Living Classroom's employment training program working with returning citizens, those coming home from incarceration.
You know, they're coming out of incarceration with something to do. And I hope it becomes something in their lives that they look back at as a really positive experience.
So it's basically hands-on. You learn from as you go.
You come in not knowing what you're doing. Now you got this skill set that you never ever thought that you would learn how to do.
This is a life-changing experience.
For them to have opportunities for second chances, for them to be able to build new legacies and new lifelines for their families. This is not just something that Living Classrooms does. This is a part of its pulse. It's a part of its heartbeat.
But Project Serve is just one component of Living Classrooms' mission. Living Classrooms Foundation began 1985 with a couple teachers who had a vision of building a ship for kids.
And they were working out of a trailer in a parking lot.
We brought together students from many different backgrounds to work alongside skilled shipwrights to build the Lady Maryland, a 104-foot pungy schooner.
She was built just very close to here in the inner harbor of Baltimore over by the Science Center, and then launched in 1986. Throughout Chesapeake Bay history, many African Americans were captains of pungy schooners.
And after Lady Maryland, Living Classrooms Foundation have continued to expand their fleet of educational vessels. They're inextricably linked to the history of African Americans as watermen on the Chesapeake. Mildred Bell is buy boat. So this was a time saver. Instead of having to go all the way back to sell their catch, they sold their catch to the buy boats, hence the name buy boats.
Sigsbee is a classic Chesapeake Bay vessel called a skipjack. She's designed to dredge for oysters in very shallow water. 1 in 10 skipjack captains were black sailors. It's a part of our history that made this waterfront so successful.
We are honored to also be the stewards for the lightship Chesapeake, which guarded the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay for dozens and dozens of years. The USS Torsk, a famous submarine that sank the last 2 ships of World War II. And then there's also the Coast Guard Cutter 37, which is the last ship afloat from the attack of Pearl Harbor.
I mean, boats like Lady Maryland, Sigsbee, Mildred Bell, I can't tell you how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of kids have sailed on board these boats.
This was maybe STEM education before the term STEM was coined.
They take students of all ages out on the water and give them maritime skills, also while getting an understanding of the bodies of water that surrounds this actual place that we're sitting in.
If we're not taking care of the water, if we're not studying it, if we're not making sure they're clean, then that's gonna come full circle back to us. It's important to think about that bigger picture, even in the city.
One of the expansions of Living Classrooms was to create the Frederick Douglass Isaac Myers Maritime Park.
There was a dream of buying this area, of being able to put a shipyard in this area that we could haul our own ships out on our own railway. That was very close to where Isaac Myers had opened up his first all-black-owned railway, and also very close to where Frederick Douglass was a caulker.
And this was to draw attention to the importance of African Americans in the history of building the city, in the history of shipbuilding, and also as watermen on the Chesapeake.
Baltimore is one of the 3 largest ports on the East Coast, and that is in no small part due to the contributions of black maritime workers throughout the centuries. In many ways, it's an unspoken or just unresearched story, and that's part of the mission of the Frederick Douglass Isaac Myers Maritime Center, is to pay tribute and bring awareness to the story of black maritime workers.
I think if people were able to come in here and, take in these views and just to understand this history, I think they will really be appreciative of, what Baltimore comes from. I think that was the biggest thing for me, was really giving the people an idea of what we came from and, how we're progressing and moving in the right direction. Douglass said it best. He said, education is the key to freedom.
History recalls Frederick Douglass as an amazing abolitionist and speaker and orator. Not too many folks know about his early pivotal years.
He's enslaved on the Eastern Shore.
And came to Baltimore as a slave to work as a caulker here on the Fells Point waterfront.
Little did he know, Frederick Douglass was going to run into a gentleman by the name of Isaac Myers while working in this industry. Mr. Myers was born to a free family here in Baltimore City. He received the little bit of education he did from this Quaker pastor and was able to take that and make do with it. He was able to start off as a caulker, which kind of gave him the ins and outs of the shipping industry. In September of 1865, the white workers decided to go on strike. From there, it kind of created a huge wedge in between the two groups, which then kind of led for some African Americans to say, you know what, you guys don't want to treat us fairly. We're going to go ahead and start our own business. We're going to start our own co-op, and everything will be run by us, and the money will stay in-house. Myers and 14 others went on to found the Chesapeake Marine Railway and Dry Dock Company, which would go on to become one of the biggest marine businesses here in Baltimore.
They had a monopoly on that particular trade, and there really were not any white caulkers. It was just the black ship caulkers. They were skilled, they knew their trade, and so they were able to wield a lot of power setting the wages and the working conditions and even sometimes who they worked with.
Douglass is a true warrior story in its own. A lot of people talk about his abolition work, but they don't talk about how he really got his start. If it wasn't for him going through these situations with being a caulker and, living here down in the Point, there wouldn't have been no Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist. If these two people were here right under our noses, what other people do we have that we really don't know about?
The everyday mother, father, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, cousin, these people were just as important as Douglass and Isaac Myers. They were the everyday worker, and their stories need to be uplifted and documented.
We try to find various ways to uncover African-American history and culture. We'll look in the Afro-American newspaper, we'll look in historic repositories, museums, libraries.
Representation is important in movies and pop culture today for everyone. It's also important to see yourself in history, but written records often don't reflect that.
The reason that we are having a difficult time uncovering or connecting the dots or finding proper documentation is a complex question with a complex answer. Most of the records were collected and documented through the lens of white privilege. The white folks that were the census takers did not care to get the spellings correct, to get the streets correct, to get the age, to get anything correct, because these are just black folk. And they knew that some of the black folk were illiterate.
The truth in that history is something that we have to be able to embrace and understand and wrestle with.
You are walking in the path of some of these pioneering black mariners in Fells Point.
Fells Point is a waterfront community in Baltimore. It is on Baltimore Harbor. It's part of the inner Patapsco River. What is today the inner harbor was marshy and shallow compared to the natural deep water that we find here in Fells Point. This became an area where all the shipbuilding took place. And then naturally, the enslaved men and the men who were trying to gain their freedom were all working here as shipwrights, caulkers, boat builders, and doing all kinds of repair work. It's all wooden boats in those days.
You can begin to actually place various occupations with these African-American mariners on these streets. You can't always walk in the front door with research, just like you can't always go in the front door in someone's house.
But we are actually discovering archaeology makes that possible.
These wooden structures are one of very few left in the city of Baltimore. Although the houses themselves are historic from an architectural standpoint, it really is about the story that these houses tell. Who lived here, what they did, what their contributions were to the greater Baltimore area, which is part of why we did the archaeological dig, to find some of those remnants, to understand that story.
And what we discovered is that while the houses have a huge amount of information to impart just in and of themselves, so much of the story was lived into the ground by the people who lived in the houses, especially in the first part of the 19th century.
We recovered over 10,000 artifacts, and we actually found the people who lived here were African-American ship's caulkers.
A lot of our kind of pre-Civil War history that we hear about African Americans has to do with, slavery or, escaping. But I think it's a different story and an empowering story that they were able to create a society for themselves.
We found a number of children's toys. We had a ton of marbles of all types. When you are playing marbles and you win, you get to take the marbles of your competitors. And one of the things that we thought was really interesting is we had a variety of very decorative marbles, more maybe expensive marbles. The children who lived in the caulkers' houses were basically the kids that you did not want to mess with because you're going to lose to them. We found a large quantity of slate tablets and pencils, and that makes sense. The African-American ship's caulkers were part of a society that promoted education amongst themselves as well as their community. So to find evidence of that, like physical, concrete, tangible evidence of that, was very exciting. These are the stories about what life was like to a community of free African Americans living in a slave state in a city that had both a large free Black population as well as a large enslaved population, and the intersection of those lives.
The caulkers helped to build the world that was Fells Point at that time and to shape the community. It's really our responsibility to understand how things got the way they are.
Another important way to uplift, educate, and uncover Baltimore's maritime history is the historic Mount Auburn Cemetery. The nickname is the City of the Dead for colored people. This cemetery is gold. It has over 51,000 bodies that have been identified, with possibly up to 55,000 that are interred here. From formerly enslaved to Civil War soldiers to mariners, you name it, they're here.
I have an assortment of cabinet cards and ferrotypes of African American men. And the idea was to show that we don't know what a Black mariner looks like. We often might have one idea in our head. We might see them in some sort of maritime type clothing, but often these men dress very dapper.
This is just one of countless mysteries that we are trying to uncover. This magnificent motif of a vessel or sailboat is at the top right here. It's outstanding. And the captain, we don't even know the initials, what they stand for, but we have his lifeline. And the name Captain, this had to be somebody important. This is a fabulous granite carved headstone that is well preserved. So we are going to continue our research to try to learn more specifics about the life and legacy and impact of Captain Ian Wilson, who's buried right here at Mount Auburn Cemetery. Who is Alfred Young? First of all, he's a pioneering reverend who is well known throughout the state of Maryland because he pastors different churches, and most notably, he was a pastor at Sharp Street Church, which this cemetery is a part of.
He also had maritime connections as a steward and a waiter on 2 vessels that exploded. Again, you never know when you're looking at a photograph if they were a maritime worker or not, because the average maritime worker did not look like what society or stereotypical cartoons would have painted a Black maritime worker as looking.
There were a ton of different jobs available in Baltimore for maritime community folk because we're in a major port of call. Whether you were free or enslaved, there were opportunities. You could be a stevedore, you could be a ship hand, you could be a seaman, you could be a ship carpenter, you could be an oyster shucker, you could even be an oakum picker. And of course, you could be a sailor, and then of course, you could be a captain, which we've uncovered several pioneering black captains.
It is very important to know where you come from. One thing that we obviously see today, that we're facing a crisis of not knowing where we come from, not knowing our history, our values, our heritage, not knowing the strong-willed, strong, independent people we came from. A lot of these maritime workers, they had children, they had grandchildren, they had great-grandchildren. And if their great-grandchildren knew just an ounce of the strength that their ancestors had to be able to endure racism, segregation, Jim Crow, terrible living conditions, often in some cases, working conditions that were unbearable, but how they still survived and thrived and built communities and built families, I would think that would inspire them to say, okay, you know, great-grandma Lucy was able to do this, why can't I do this? Why can't I continue to push on? Because she did.
The maritime industries have provided family-sustaining jobs for centuries along the shorelines of the Port of Baltimore. And those opportunities still exist today. It's important to shine a light on that.
I grew up in Baltimore County in Woodlawn.
I grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland.
I grew up in Northwest Baltimore. I was in the Hanlon-Longwood neighborhood.
I grew up in a neighborhood called 10 Hills. It's in West Baltimore.
Born and raised Northeast Baltimore.
I'm a professional sailor. My aspirations are to eventually set a number of world records, including the fastest person to sail around the world ever.
I am the Director of Equity and Community Engagement at the National Aquarium.
I'm an urban wildlife biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
I served in the Navy for 7 years. I was a loadmaster on C-130s.
I'm a CTE teacher teaching interactive media at Digital Harbor High School.
Well, I think one of the great things about this industry is it's so vast. This has so many economic tentacles.
You know, there's such a diverse array of things you can do.
You could do absolutely anything in the Navy, from a chef to jumping out of helicopters. Going through aircrew training was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life.
You just see opportunities on the water and maybe spark some interest that this could be a career that could be something that you could do. And I think that's mind-opening.
Working as a deckhand, becoming a captain, as a longshoreman, working at the Port of Baltimore, working on a tug.
I would encourage any youth to take that leap of faith, because you never know what it may lead to.
Let's say you're a young girl coming up behind me and you say, you know, I want to do what he did. Now there will be a young woman who becomes the first African-American woman to sail around the world nonstop. You get to choose your path. You get to choose who you want to be.
So here for the pre-release crew, I'd like to think, you know, it's setting them up for success. And now they're going to help me bring the ship back into the inner harbor.
That's another experience that a lot of us probably never did.
Feel kind of crazy when you get to the top, right?
Yeah.
Who knows if they're going to become boat builders or, you know, caulkers, but I think they've had a very valuable experience here, and hopefully that translates to whatever they're going to be doing further on in their careers and in their lives.
What a magnificent sight as Baltimore's Inner Harbor receives a gift this holiday week.
She is so much drier than she was.
To be an interested, committed sailor builds an inner strength, an inner confidence, an inner self-worth.
A sailboat is a metaphor for all the challenges that life presents. Where do you fit in this? And because there's numerous opportunities, when you have that opportunity in front of you, you recognize and you do something with it and give it a shot. The past is thousands of yesterdays. All that has to inform your present.
But how do we make sure that we understand a collective past in order for us to embrace a collective future.
We all have unique journeys. We all have unique paths. And it's really important to always stay centered.
We're still fighting to have our history raised up, but we keep sailing.